Hi, this is James Hudson or irunlucky, and this video is going to be covering 30 leaks or tips that I can give you to improve your game and crush your stakes. I've done a lot of hand reviews, coaching sessions, and analyzing of my own play over the last few years, and these 30 tips cover the biggest mistakes or misconceptions that both people I talk to and myself have had or made. Even though some of these may not apply to you, I'm confident at least 10 of these or so will help you increase your win rate dramatically. And now for tip number one. Tip number one is know yourself. By this I mean you need to know, when do you play best? Some people play best shortly after they've woken up. Some people play best after they've gone exercising. Some people play best after they've eaten for the day. Do you play best when you're playing long sessions, short sessions? Almost everyone plays best when they're not tilting. For instance, I know that personally I like caffeine, but I know that if I have too much caffeine in the day that I play far too aggressively, so I try to stay away from playing sessions after I've had several caffeinated drinks. Another thing to think about is if making big calls tilts you and makes you play worse for the rest of your session, maybe you should avoid making big calls early on in your session, because that's going to reduce your level of play for the rest of the session. Another thing that's important about knowing yourself is knowing what your image is. When I say this, I mean if you're playing really nitty in a session, then perhaps you can't 3-bet a hand like ace-queen or pocket tens for value in certain spots. You also need to know your image for post-flop situations, such as whether or not you can check raise light for value. Maybe you should be check raising less of your value hands if you haven't been check raised bluffing at all. So basically those are the kinds of things I'm talking about when I say know yourself. Tip number two is range doesn't equal frequencies. So by this I mean that just because someone has a wide range to get to the river, for instance, it doesn't necessarily mean that they're bluffing their entire range when they get there. Some people will have wide ranges all the way throughout the hand, and then when they get to the river almost never bluff. Same thing when you're talking about pre-flop and the flop. Some people have a really wide range for on the button, for instance, and c-bet almost their entire range, but barrel hardly at all, including some fairly decent draws that they won't barrel. Along these lines, you can also think of someone who opens tons of buttons. They don't necessarily defend light to 3-bets or 4-bet bluff more. So basically what I'm saying is, just because someone has a wide range, that you shouldn't automatically make assumptions about what their frequencies are going to be. You can start to gather that when you play with people more, but if you start making assumptions about their frequencies based on what their range is, you're going to make some pretty big mistakes versus a lot of people whose games aren't particularly balanced. On to tip number three. If it's close, fold. So I'd say that most people are curious by nature, and that most of you are probably making mistakes on the side of calling too much rather than folding too much. Almost everyone that I've dealt with through coaching has erred on the side of calling too much. People tend to just be overly paranoid and assume that people are bluffing far more often than they are. They also assume that people are capable of going into metagame a lot more than they actually are. So say for example you've 3-bet someone a couple of times, people automatically go into stacking off light mode because they assume their opponents are going to be playing back light, when most people are just playing 8 to 10 tables and just don't care about that kind of stuff. Another consideration is that if you think it's close and you're not doing particularly well right now with poker, then it's quite possible that it's actually an easy fold. A lot of spots where people think that it's close between a call and a fold, it's generally just a slam dunk fold, I'd say. Another consideration for this topic as well is that making incorrect calls makes a lot of people feel stupid and tends to lead them to tilt off more money. Whereas if you make a fold that happened to be wrong, it's generally not going to have the same kind of effect on you. For one, you're not even going to know if your fold was incorrect unless the opponent shows, which is fairly rare online. And secondly, I think you feel worse about yourself when you make an incorrect call and get shown the nuts than you do if you make a fold and you're kept guessing for the rest of your session. You generally get over that fairly quickly. Also, remember that when you make a big fold, your opponent doesn't know what 2 cards you had. So if no one knows, there's really no reason for you to be thinking, it's so weak for me to fold here, I'm going to be exploited. If your opponent has no clue what it is that you folded, you really shouldn't worry about it.